Okay, welcome, guard.
Wes, can I just test that you can hear me?
Yes, you can test it, and I can hear you.
Very good, very good.
All right, I'll make a quick announcement to invite some of those people in here and get a good discussion going.
I was enjoying the elevator music. Right, well, certainly looks like we don't quite have the same turnout, but I see Rizzo's here at least. That's very good. I think Pierandra, am I saying that right, was the person who had a proposal about something earlier, I recall. Give it a couple more minutes and I'll maybe say some like opening remarks and then won't be long, and then we'll just open up for questions and discussion and anything that you guys want to talk about. All right, we've got Milkman. That's good. Probably all right. Anybody who wants to join in after is of course welcome. So I guess to start off with, and then we'll open questions, is just a kind of brief explanation of what I was trying to say earlier in the chat. And apologies, my voice is a little bit down. I've actually been in court this week. I mean, as a lawyer, not like as a defendant. The issue, there's two main issues around distributing capital to the members. And the membership of this DAO is defined by the token. So anybody who holds a token is a member. And that's why they get to vote and so on and so forth. So the two main issues are, one, that we might classify under a different kind of legal status. And two, the old familiar securities law stuff. And, expectation of profits and so on and so forth. Starting with the first, the issue with capital distributions or any distributions of profits, and you'd be surprised at what counts as a capital distribution, is basically that we already have most, if not all, of the hallmarks of a partnership or of a general partnership, except the fact that we don't share profits with our members. I mean, not like I as a member am not entitled to profits. Neither is Hazard. Neither is anybody else. The thing that's important about so we don't qualify for that sort of treatment. So we don't come under a general partnership. Now, why do we want to avoid being a general partnership? That is because if you are a general partnership, then you all are partners with each other. Or we are all partners with each other. And that means all of the stuff that comes with being a partner in an enterprise also apply to you and me and everybody else. So that means you have what's called mutual agency, which means you can bind each other in the contracts. So I could do something as a member of the DAO. I could, because I'd be a full partner like everybody else, I could go out and pledge the DAO assets for a private jet and then fly off with it. And that's all fine and well. What's another hack? But the problem with it is that you guys would be then left to pick up the bill, because every partner, we wouldn't just have mutual agency. We also have what's called joint and several liability. And that means that every partner is liable for the actions of every other partner. So it's like the flip side of the mutual agency part. So if I make a contract to purchase a private jet or whatever and don't pay my bill, then I could bind the DAO assets. So I could say I'm a general partner in this DAO. These assets belong to me just like they belong to everybody else. And all of you would be kind of left to pick up that bill. And that of course is very, very undesirable, because we have a lot of members and we don't, I don't know you and you don't know me and you don't know each other. So we don't know what people would do with this mutual agency if they had it. So that's one problem, and is a problem that we want to avoid. Importantly, and this ties into the next part, which is the securities part. So importantly, it also means that enforcement action can be taken against any one of the partners, because every partner is an equal partner. So that means that if they don't have to find like Hazard or Jay-Z or me or anybody else, they could just find any one of you and bring the enforcement action against you or anybody else. And that, of course, is a big problem, and that's a problem that we want to avoid. That's the problem that I refer to when I talk about the Uki DAO thing, and I know people don't like, or people don't want me to go on and on about it, and I promise I won't anymore, but that is the problem with it. So kind of a multivariate collection of problems that comes with our status if we were a general partnership. Now, secondly, and I probably don't need to talk very much about this, the securities law implications are probably familiar to everybody. And the problem is this. In the United States, they define a security in a really stupid way, or in a really peculiar way. It's not how any other part of the world does it, but the US does it, and many of our members and contributors and others are in the US. Not that that really matters. But what that means is that if we were to do this kind of capital distribution or a distribution of profits in a way that looks like a distribution of profits or a capital distribution, and there are many, many things that qualify as such, if we were to do that, it would have this difficult problem, which is that not only would enforcement be available to against each and every one of you, but it would also be quite a bit more likely, because, as you know, one of the determining factors of being or something being a security is that there's an expectation of profits from the efforts of others. So but I'm sure you guys have seen this before, and it's sort of more or less familiar. So I don't think I probably need to go into that too much. But as you know, and as you've seen, there's all kinds of people who are getting subpoenas from the SEC right now. All kinds of people. What you probably haven't seen and don't know so much about is it's not just regulatory enforcement actions that have proliferated in the last few months, but it's also all kinds of private lawsuits. And these private lawsuits are very likely being farmed. So the way it works is some guy comes along and buys a single token, or like £10 worth or $10 worth of tokens, and then that gives them standing to sue the rest of the DAO, particularly usually the leadership of said DAO. And the argument will be something like, well, I suffered a loss because of your actions, and you did this sort of thing, or that sort of thing, and that's why I should have a claim against the DAO assets because I'm a partner too. So, and these lawsuits really, they are proliferating. I could post in the Discord one that was not too long ago filed, and if I can find it, I'll find it later. And you'll see that the person literally, it's like some staffer of Elizabeth Warren or something who just bought $10 worth of token and sued. So that kind of enforcement action, which is like a private lawsuit, an indirect enforcement action, would also be available to against all of you. So somebody doesn't have to find Hazard or me or Joe or Jay-Z or anybody else. They could just find anyone. And it's actually, no matter how hard we try to be anonymous, it's actually not that difficult to find people. Like, I work in my civilian job, I work in quite often in tax things. And I can tell you that the HMRC, so the United Kingdom version of the IRS, has access to exactly the same software as MI5 does when it tries to find people. It really isn't that difficult. They can find you. It's super easy. You can just literally just punch in your name in it, and it finds you. It's perfectly legal. No problem with it. And this is why it's not been an issue for enforcement to, like, this an anonymity that we hold so dear has not been a problem for, bodies like the SEC or whoever. So those are kind of the main heads of problems that we are trying to sort of juggle. And I get that it's frustrating, and trust me, it's very frustrating for me as well, and everybody in the team. That's not to say that we can't do anything. There are ways that we can do things, and part of my job is to try to come up with such creative ways. If I can't, then if we come up with an idea that might work, and I don't know whether that would count as a distribution or whatever, then we ask external counsel, and so the legal review side of this it's probably pretty boring to most of you, but it is something that we do fairly actively, and it doesn't mean the fact that there are laws doesn't mean that we can't do anything. And finally, this isn't just a US problem, particularly the former one, the general partnership one. That's a problem absolutely everywhere. So, for example, Singapore has exactly the same laws. England has exactly the same laws. Any common law country, in fact, has the same problems, like Australia or whatever. And the rest of the world, known as the civil law countries, also have this problem, except that it's worse, because if you are in many of those countries, it's actually illegal to have a general partnership that's unregistered. And so, for example, actually, Singapore is like this. So in Singapore, if you're a member of a general partnership that's larger than, I think, maybe 9 people or 7 people, you're committing a crime just by being a member of it. And the penalty for it is 3 years in prison. Maximum penalty is 3 years in prison. So it's no joke if somebody is found to be a member of a partnership in a place where it's illegal. For example, in Singapore, I think China also has similar laws, and all kinds of places. That person could go to prison. And obviously, these are some of the things that we have to consider when we make decisions whose purpose is to serve the kind of to be in the best interests of the DAO as a whole, right? So not an individual member, not even Hazard, but the body as a whole. So those are the main issues, or those are the kind of issues that have come up in this discussion, or today's discussion. Now, I should probably say a word or two. You probably didn't come here really to listen to a bunch of legal jargon or legal talk. I should probably say a word or two about the actual proposal. And maybe the most important thing to say about that is that it may not be perfect. It was intended as a version of what was talked about in the Discord yesterday. There were some problems with, so some ideas were being thrown around. I think DC of God was the person who mentioned it, and others seemed to be in broad support of it. There were some problems with that, but this is one way, not the only way, but one way that those problems could be overcome. And there was a very sort of swift process of legal review on that, and certainly, by the looks of it, it should be all right. But there's a kind of degree of risk tolerance that you have to have if you're in crypto generally, particularly if you're actually a contributor in a project, let alone the kind of one of the people who are in leadership positions in a project. So it's not without legal risk. It's not necessarily the absolute optimum perfect thing that people want, but it's one version. That doesn't have to pass. You can still vote no. We can also amend it. I saw another kip that was posted earlier that was calling for the dissolution of the DAO. that is actually one way that we could do something like what people want, or what people seem to want. So that could work. The question is that really what we want? And it may be. I mean, that's fine too. You can. It's a perfectly valid thing to ask for and to have a kip about and to vote on. Might have some problems when it comes to the survival of the project itself, but it is a DAO. It is able to dissolve itself. I think another good proposal that I saw was the one that was kind of like a middle point between. As I understood it, it was something like that you would actually end up with two DAOs. One would be the one that the incubator DAO, which has a lot more leeway in what it's able to do, and that would be for for people who don't support this one, or who don't feel like they have necessarily all the confidence in the world in the future of the project, which is fine. You're allowed to have your doubts. And another DAO would be kind of going on as business as usual, of course, with regular governance and everything else. So everything is up for a vote. We're not trying to push anything down anybody's throats. It was a version of what looked like people were eager to try yesterday, and maybe it wasn't the best version, but that's why these discussions are. That's why it's good to have these discussions. Now, I know I said that I wouldn't speak for very long, and I think I've already taken quite a bit of time. So why don't we then open it up for questions? And I'm more than happy to answer anything that I can answer.
So if anyone has any questions, please raise your hand and I'll bring you up to the stage.
Oh, by the way, while we wait for the bravest among you to step up, and by the way, and you could literally ask. You can ask me anything. You can ask me what I had for breakfast, or whether I had intimate relations with somebody's mother. But while we wait for those questions to come through, I forget who it was that suggested or who posted Collins's thing earlier, but I did actually get in touch with him, and he said that he's a little bit busy with his trading. I take it, because he said we can chat after the FOM shenanigans are over. But he did actually also say that he didn't have an awful lot to say about it other than what was on Twitter, but I'll keep asking and we'll see where we get to. But I mean, he's a nice guy, very cool guy, very enthusiastic about decentralization and the sort of general crypto ethos. So I'm sure he'll have something good to say. He did say that he's not particularly familiar with the facts, but I'm more than happy to walk him through that. So we're probably going to have some kind of chat. I'll let you know how that goes. If I'll try to invite him to come over and we could have this chat in public here, because that would be good. You guys can hear sort of different takes on things, but we'll see how that works out. So with that being said, does anybody have any questions now? I think Milkman has his hand up. How do I? Oh,
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
I assume you can hear me.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. No, thanks for that explanation. I mean, one of the queries I had posted on, I wasn't too sure if you had responded to, was, has the DAO taken any external advice as to its classification as a general partner, or is that just the in-house view at this stage?
There has been, yeah. We had quite a lot of quite detailed advice on that, yeah. Anything else? And doesn't have to be like super legal or anything. Like, you can also just ask any whatever. I may not know the answer because my job is sort of limited to in its scope. But
hey, Guard, can you hear me?
Yeah, good. How are you?
So I'm doing been better. I'm sure you too. I have a really specific question around the nature of one rook equals one rook. And this is maybe trying to extrapolate from maybe a traditional finance sense, but it seems like there's a lot of legal risk vectors if you have a series of tokens that are all one equals one, and then you try to make some worth more than less. And so I guess I'm thinking about that in terms of a classic governance attack, where if you have 51% of the tokens, you put forward a proposal to say, now my shares are preferred shares, yours are common, they're subordinated, and now I have all the power. And there's a lot of, again, I'm asking you, but my understanding is there's a lot of vectors of risk there. It seems like, to me at least, just from a logical sense, that you create those same vectors of risk by trying to chop things up inequitably. Is that your take?
I'm not really sure what that refers to. So let's see if I can work through that.
Maybe I'll ask it again. So let's say we all have 100 tokens, and somebody puts up a proposal to say that my tokens, or let's
say
you put up a proposal, you say guards tokens are now worth more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that part I got. Yeah.
Okay. No, yeah, and so my understanding is that typically that would create a vector of risk, right? Because then the token holders who have now been subordinated to your tokens are going to say that's not fair.
I mean, sure, but that's assuming that the votes didn't pass, or that the votes passed somehow. So what I'm saying is the DAO is the actual kind of legal term that we have for something like a DAO is an unincorporated association, a UA for short. So what a UA is just a kind of amalgamation of people who define their own rules, and there's weirdly quite a bit of case law about how they work. That's mostly been forgotten, but nonetheless it exists. One of the things that this case law says is that organization really does define its own rules. So if it passes governance, then it's legal in a kind of inverted commas sense. It may not be. I mean, it may, if you like pass a vote to murder somebody or something, then of course there would be a crime involved, but the crime wouldn't be the vote. So it wouldn't be like that the DAO did something that was outside its power or outside its ability to do. It's just that the effect of it is a crime. So there may be.
Could I pass a law to give the treasury to me?
I mean, if you can get the votes passed, then and there's nothing else that's illegal about it, then yeah, sure. I mean, the association just defines its own rules, and if it follows its own rules, and none of its rules were broken, then anything goes. I mean, that's why we have a governance system that is quite well defined and mm-hmm. is aiming to take into account those kinds of risks, like these 51% attacks. So that kind of situation wouldn't really be possible in our case.
But it is, right? And so that's why I'm wondering why it's an interesting answer, because I would expect that if someone were to do that, then there would be an avalanche of people claiming things like fraud or misrepresentations of what their token meant.
I'm sure there would be, but what I said is that unless there's some other, crime involved in that, and I don't see that there necessarily would be. I mean, obviously, there may be a representation that's been made somewhere that I'm unaware of, but it doesn't. I can't think of one particularly at this point, but I mean, if one exists, then of course you wouldn't be able to do that because it would be illegal. That's actually why we don't always, or it's my understanding, I'm actually not that involved in governance because we have a guy for that, but it's my understanding that there have been proposals which have, as it were, in inverted commas, passed. But when they hit SOFON review, what happens afterwards is we figure out whether that's actually a viable thing to do, or whether this would involve some kind of crime or whatever, then what would be my job is I try to go through the public documents and everything else that's been said and see if, for example, if there's been a misrepresentation or if this would amount to a misrepresentation.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so at that stage, that sort of thing would be corrected.
Right.
And it's the system has the governance system that we have has its perks.
Right.
It can be quite unwieldy sometimes, and I know that that's very frustrating to people. And trust me, it's frustrating for team members as well sometimes. But that it has its benefits.
No, that's good, and that's helpful context. I think, based on memory, which could be incorrect, is that there is some aspect of one rook equals one rook. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but that's what worries me about any sort of non-equal divorce, so to speak.
Yeah, and that's certainly worth looking into. If you or anybody else who's listening kind of finds anything like that, then of course let me know. And when things come up for software review or general kind of legal overview of things, then that would be something that it would be my duty to bring up.
Good. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks. But excellent set of questions. What I have really liked about these last couple of days, even though it's coincided with like a really super busy period in my normal job, being in court and everything. What I have really liked about this last couple of days is the fact that quite a lot of fairly sophisticated governance discussion is happening. It sometimes comes off as a bit of a like scream because I get that people are frustrated because token prices are down and trust me, this isn't the first DAO where I've seen this frustration about the fact that something is just a governance token, and does that mean that it doesn't have any value and this sort of thing. Like that's a thing that gets discussed in a lot of DAOs, much bigger than ours. But it has been really nice to see. It's been a little bit quiet in the Discord lately, and it's nice to see people coming back and having these sorts of discussions. And if that discussion matures into a proposal, that would be even better, because like many of these discussions that have been had have actually made their way into proposals. And thank you guys who posted those, because that's really how you change the rules of the DAO. Remember, the DAO defines its own rules. So if we go through the process that we have, that is the way that we can actually change things. So yeah. Right, let's see. Looks like there's a couple of questions in the okay, I've allowed a little bit of a backlog here. I think so. Milkman already came up. Is that a separate question to the one that you asked previously? So we haven't done anything. So what the question was basically is asking is did external counsel agree? We don't act against legal advice, is all I'll say on that. So you can make your own conclusions. And there was another question from BMO. Let's see. Could we clear up the situation regarding the ownership of the treasury? So I have actually talked about this in quite some length in the Discord, but of course those messages would have been buried. So basically the question of ownership of the assets of something like a UA is a little bit of a red herring, because ownership isn't really a concept that the common law knows. It's and this gets a little bit technical, but there's different kinds of interests that you can have in assets. And several people can have different interests in the same assets. So one example would be you might, in inverted commas, own a house, which in legal speak is you have the legal title to that house. But somebody else might have a lease, and that's just as much a property right in that house than the quote unquote ownership. So that's kind of, for context, that's kind of how I would like you guys to think about what I'm about to say. So there are different kinds of interests in that constitute the thing that we call ownership. There is there's things like control, and importantly, there's something called residual ownership. Now, residual ownership is the thing that a shareholder has in a company. Shareholders don't really own the company assets directly, as you may know, as you no doubt know. Shareholders own shares directly, and if the company is dissolved, then they have the residual claim on those assets. So once all the creditors have been paid and whatever, anything that's left is given to the shareholders, right? So that's the kind of residual ownership that I'm talking about. It is quite likely that, based on the kind of origin of the assets, that the residual ownership is indeed lies with Jay-Z. But that doesn't mean that he owns the assets in inverted commas now. Or rather, in inverted commas, owns the assets now. Because he can't do what he wants with them. That's one of the indicia of ownership, is that you're free to do whatever you want with your assets as long as it's not illegal. He doesn't have that part, right? So he doesn't, in that sense, own the assets. Just like the shareholders of a company don't own the company assets. But what he and other people in the multisig have is something else. It's another part of ownership, another little piece of ownership, which is called possession. So they hold the assets, but once again, they are not free to do with those assets whatever they feel like doing, and that's because the DAO exists, right? So they hold those assets. The legal theory on this is a little bit tricky, but basically as trustees. So they have to follow basically the established rules of governance when it comes to what to actually do with those assets. So they may be holding them, and in that sense, they might be the owner, and not just Joey in this case, but it's a number of people. But they can't actually do anything they want with it. Now, the residual claim is, of course, it's super important if push comes to shove. So if the multisig disappears and if the DAO disappears, then the residual ownership is what you're left with. And once all the creditors are paid and everything else. So the residual ownership is kind of the last thing that's left after all the other claims on the assets are that's what's called residual ownership. It is important, no doubt about that, but it's not important kind of at present, because it doesn't give the rights that people normally think ownership entails. So I know that's a very complicated and kind of legalistic answer, but it is how it is. It is the likely situation that we find ourselves in. I could maybe stop it there, because I was going to launch into a long thing about what other options might be available and how and why they are not persuasive. But basically, it doesn't really seem to be anybody else who would have that residual claim. Now, the DAO in a sense owns the assets, because the DAO is the body that gets to decide what is done with the assets. And that's usually the part that people are interested in when they talk about ownership. So once again, Joey can't decide that by himself. It's the DAO as a whole that decides that through its governance and so on and so forth. So it's possible, as a matter of property law, for the DAO to distribute the assets. That's not the problem. The problem is, what would that mean for the status of the DAO and the problems that would entail. So Milkman says, if the advice is on behalf of the DAO, then the DAO is entitled to that advice. Now, I completely see where you're coming from, and this is going to be an irritating kind of lawyer type answer. But I mean, as you guys may be aware, there are reasons why you can't circulate legal advice actually, maybe I should. That's kind of the second part of what I really want to say. The first part is that the DAO itself is not a legal person, so the DAO isn't actually given any advice. The people who are given advice are the partnership, and so those are the people that actually engage the lawyers and who receive the advice. Now, the second part of this answer is to do with legal privilege, or legal professional privilege, rather. First thing that you may or may not know about legal professional privilege is that it is for the person to waive. So if the person who was given the advice waives it, then it becomes open. Then it's sort of public and can be shared. But if that person doesn't, then there's nothing that the lawyer can do to share that advice, be it my advice or any of the other people's advice. So it's kind of point number one. And point number two is why should you not waive privilege? And this is like, day one of your second year in law school. There are things there. So the reason we have legal professional privilege in the first place is that legal advice is candid and includes matters which you don't want necessarily everybody to see. For example, if it's public and publicly shared, it would or could hypothetically reveal some issues that create vulnerabilities and legal risks for the DAO and for the token holders. So let's imagine in a hypothetical world, and this is not the content of any actual advice, but let's imagine in a hypothetical world that the advice says, yes, you are a general partnership and you should probably do something about that. Then the problems associated with that status would be out in the open, and whoever wants to sort of take advantage of it could. And not only could they, but they could use that advice against you in court. So there are very, very good reasons why legal professional privilege exists and why it shouldn't be waived. And I know it's frustrating, but it's frankly, it's kind of how it is. I know that we're in crypto, and I know that decentralization is a thing, and we would like, for all information to be public and shared and that sort of thing. But sometimes it's just not a good idea. And that was also a frustratingly long answer, but it is good too. It shows you a little bit about the engine room of how the DAO actually works. I know that, like, as a member, because you're probably all members in a bunch of DAOs, and you may not be necessarily devoting all that much time to Rook, and that's understandable. That's how it is. But kind of in the engine room of the DAO, there's a lot of this kind of stuff that goes on, and that the officers of the DAO, or the leadership team of the DAO, the stuff that they have to juggle. And that's why there's a lot of public disclosures about the kind of stuff that we've been doing, or that the DAO's or the development team has been doing, and so on and so forth. That's why we have calls 3 times a week, and why we sometimes do calls like this. We try to share as much as we can, and I know it's frustrating that not everything can always be shared. BMO says that, before that was Greenback. Actually, before that was another Greenback, which is, could you do a Dutch tender for RO? Sorry, I must have missed what RO means. But in short, I mean, we're perfectly willing to entertain any reasonable proposal. If you put it in a proposal, or if you just kind of DM us if you want us to write the proposal, that's fine too. Yesterday's thing and Jay-Z's Kip today is an example of how something that, like, all right, maybe we didn't do the best possible job at it, or whatever, and that's up for a vote. But if you do want something that to be kind of put up to a vote. You can write the KIP yourself, or you can just DM one of us and pitch your idea and make sure that we understand it, and then we can try to write that KIP too, if it's something that we agree with, that the person that you're talking to agrees with and wants to write the KIP for you. All right, so Greenback is again. Nexus is regulated in the UK and has clearance to do this. I assume that's. Let's see if I get to these questions so late that I don't quite get what this refers to. Is it still referring to the Dutch auction thing? Yeah, I mean, more than happy to take a look at it. If it works somewhere else, then I might even know the lawyer who's helping them. Then great, yeah, more than happy to take a look. And then BMO's thing, which I almost got to earlier, is simply don't understand how Jay-Z could have that residual claim since the treasury was essentially gained through a token sale. And I'm afraid that's not accurate. The treasury was not gained through a token sale. And I know that I've seen the views that it's essentially like a token sale because there was some funny business that went on. Some people were like MEVing the MEV. So they may have put a lot of order flow through the system in an effort to try to gain a kind of a larger amount in Rook tokens, which they could then dump to the market. I think I understand that argument. But the thing is, just from a purely legal perspective, I'm not saying whether this is like morally right or wrong or whatever, but from a purely legal perspective, there is no way that the money in the treasury could be traced to the money that the token holder would have lost by somebody dumping their tokens into the market. If it's traceable to anything, it's the person who put in that order. Their money then goes into their orders get filled and whatever. Ninja makes some MEV or manages to cough out some MEV. That MEV then gets put into the treasury. So it's, again, purely from a legal perspective, I would not be at all confident if I was forced to make that argument in court that the money actually came from the token holders. And we know that it didn't come from a direct token sale. I mean, I'm sure we can all agree that just never happened. I mean, of course, there was a token sale, but that wasn't where the treasury was seated. Now, if there's something I don't get about that argument, please feel free to, DM me or whatever. I'm more than happy to take a look at it. And if that's the case, if it is traceable I can then offer my view as to whether that would amount to something that would be legally traceable. But it would be a very, very difficult argument to make for a number of reasons, which are a little bit legalistic. There's more discussion about NXM, and Greenback made a few comments again about the Dutch auction. It's hard for me to kind of say off the cuff based on a fairly limited amount of information, as I'm sure you'll understand. But that sounds like it could have some promise, and if so, then great. BMO in the comments is also is following up and saying it wasn't order flow; it was selling ETH that was worth 1,000 for 900 and then getting 150 in return. I mean, as an example. Yeah, that's what I was talking about. So in that event, it's just not money that kind of comes directly from a token holder. It's money that maybe a token holder loses because somebody was able to get that 150 in Rook as a reward, and then they dump that. But again, purely from a legal perspective, that's not how tracing works in law. You can't even trace through a mixed fund, and in other forms of tracing, you can't, for example, trace through a debt. So if it's a little bit of legal debate about that, but I'm sure you're not interested in that. But the overall position is that if, for example, I stole some money from the DAO or whatever, or let's say that I was a partner in a partnership, I took some money out of the partnership assets and I used that money to pay off a debt that I had rather than to buy something. So let's say I took a debt to buy a house, and then the next day I steal the money and I use that money to pay off the debt. Even that would not be traceable. And again, just as a legal point. And that's why, because residual ownership, it's a legal concept, so that's why the likeliest place where that resides is with Jay-Z. But again, it's kind of a red herring when we are looking at a structure like a DAO. Because the parts of ownership that we're interested in is who has the ability to do stuff with the money. And Joey doesn't have that. And I think that's also, as you see, Cement3 has also posted something which I think is just a description of how the Rook token will fit into the system. But yeah, I don't know if there's a question there. So yes, I mean, the profits have gone to a pool controlled by Rook holders. But yeah, thanks Greenback. If anybody else wants to, I realized that I have my friend settings or my privacy settings kind of on fairly harsh terms, but if you want to DM me, just send me like a friend request. I'll accept, and then feel free to DM. Apologies if you're hearing like gross annoying noises from my microphone. It's fairly close to my face, but not a relevant point of discussion for this call. Okay. Depoldism. Curious what Guard's take is on other protocols' approaches to workarounds to profit sharing, say for example Maker. I've seen versions of it. There are versions that work better than others. And there are versions that work better than others for certain purposes, right? So bear in mind again that it's not just securities law that we're worried about, although that is the thing that most people are only worried about. But it's also all kinds of other things. Apologies. Like I said, I've been a little bit busy with my day job today, so sorry, I have to catch my voice a little bit. Just have a drink of water. Right. So being the lawyer that I am, I don't know if I want to comment on any individual protocol or project, including Maker, but let's say in general, there are sorts of profit sharing arrangements which do get around reasonably nicely the securities laws problems. I say reasonably nicely because frankly we don't really know if they actually work, because the SEC hasn't. I mean, they certainly think that they don't, but leaving that aside. So there are ways in which the securities laws aspects can be made to work. Such ways, or good potential ways for that, are, for example, if the profit sharing is so heavily automated that you can no longer say that the profit sharing is coming from the efforts of others. So if the, let's say by analogy, to avoid commenting on particular ways of doing it, but let's say that if your protocol is built in such a way that you're a little bit like a city, and that all that your protocol does is zone places for other people to build houses. And then people come and build those houses. They become really nice areas. People want to live there, and the house prices over there go up. That makes the land value of your city go up too, right? If the profit sharing arrangement of the city that, as it were, owns the land, if it works like that, then that is what we would probably call sufficiently decentralized. because the profit in that case isn't really coming from the efforts of the people who do the zoning. It's coming from the general housing market, or the general kind of market for land. And if you do it like that, then that might work, and is certainly thought to have worked for a few projects. Bimo in again with another one. So could you comment on amending Jay-Z's KIP to make it that the incubator DAO would be opt-in only, so that only token holders that opt into the KIP through voting allocating tokens to a smart contract would be a part of the DAO? Yeah, I think somebody else also said this in the Discord. Maybe it was you. That might be that's something worth looking into. Yeah, I mean, there's of course the having the technical capability to do it, which we probably have, is kind of only one part of the problem. Because sometimes when you sort of execute something in a way that seems really clever, it can actually cause some further problems, and that may be the case if we deploy a smart contract to that effect. But it's definitely worth looking into, and I think whoever said it, if it was you or somebody else in the Discord, I think I already answered that. Yeah, that we'll be looking into something like that, and I think one or two members of one or two contributors have also been taking views on what is rumored to be a similar-ish kind of idea, and yeah, I'm all for it. Let's see how that works, and when it comes to the point where it's time for me to take a look at it, then I'll do so with glee. Hang on, there's another one. Or alternatively, I'm assuming there would be no legal differentiation between the current proposal posted by Jay-Z and amending it such that the new incubator DAO gets allocated the full current treasury. I don't think that there would be any particular legal differentiation. I think it would be difficult to achieve in practice, and essentially it just amounts to the same thing that we have the KIP for, that somebody already posted, which is to do with the dissolution of the DAO. And so in effect, it's just saying, forget the project. We just want the pool of assets, and that may be so, and there's nothing inherently invalid about wanting that. But query whether that is what we really want, and yeah. But there is a KIP to a similar effect. I think what most, if I was kind of reading the room correctly earlier, I think what most people are perhaps more interested in is not the kind of dissolution of the DAO and possibly with it the project, but some kind of middle way that still leaves enough of a runway for the project and creates more opportunities for the token holders. And that was actually kind of what we were trying to do, or what was the intention behind the KIP today. Maybe that didn't get the balance right. That's a perfectly valid criticism, and one that you should make in the correct way. In the governance forums and so on and so forth. Also perfectly entitled to say that, of course, in the Discord, not saying that. But yeah, I think that's kind of what most people are interested in, including the team. Frankly, I mean, we and everybody else knows that token holders are not happy, and we also know that it's not just about the market. Nobody's happy. Like, you go to any project now, nobody's happy except a few kind of select ones with a lot of buzz around them and who are still kind of riding that buzz. But if you go to like other 2 or 3 year old projects, there's a lot of unhappiness in a lot of DAOs. But we know that, so it's about the market, and we get that. But we also know that the general market may be bad, but that's not so much our concern. Our concern, of course, is our project. And so there is a real willingness among the contributors and in the team and in the leadership to try to remedy that in some way. And that's why we have these discussions, and that's why we posted that KIP, and we'll keep, taking good ideas into account, and maybe they'll blossom into other KIPs, and then we take them forward. And BMO agrees that leaving sufficient runway is preferable. However, it is my impression that under Jay-Z's current KIP, none of the current token holders / community members would be a part of the protocol anymore anyways. Well, that's not quite the intention. As I understand it, it wasn't my KIP, but as I understand it, it wasn't quite the intention of it. So, and maybe it wasn't sufficiently expressed or whatever, but my sense of the kind of general vibe of that KIP, in light of the discussion that many of us were having the day before, is that there should be some way for the token holders to have the kind of degree of freedom that they want when it comes to the governance of these assets, but in a way that still leaves the project alive and leaves the DAO with some kind of impact on that project, right? And one of the things that, or some of the things that this kind of incubator DAO might allow you to do could well mean that you still have an influence on the project and aren't kind of gone in that way. But there may be other sorts of better ways of doing that, and maybe this KIP didn't get the right balance, like I've said, but we're open to other suggestions, and Dip, your audio is not working. I'm not hearing you. I think maybe you just didn't put your hand up and Wes didn't give you the floor. Is that what happened? I don't know. Oh, could Jay-Z maybe clear up this intention? Yeah, so Dippoldism is saying is asking here whether his audio is working, but I don't know. So, but BMO asked another one. So, sorry, this is something else above that. Oh, sorry, I missed. Sorry, Dippoldism, I missed your question above, which was, appreciate the insight. Trying to translate your land example to crypto, having trouble doing so. What are those protocols you were referencing? I'm afraid I don't know if I should say. I'm sorry. I think I'll have to leave it at that. But just try to imagine sort of systems whereby the team doesn't really need to be present anymore, because what they've built is, we often use this word ecosystem. So it's built a little bit like an ecosystem, so that individual little animals can come and do their thing and make a living for themselves out of it. But quietly in the background, the protocol is actually taking in revenue from that. And that revenue may even be reflected in the token price of that protocol. But not by distributing it, not by sort of taking it into a treasury and distributing it, but purely because the land being sold in this case is the token. And that's probably all I'll say. So if you do it like that, then it kind of works, or at least we think it does. It hasn't properly been challenged in court, but it's kind of how the current thinking is. See, Matt is doing God's work in explaining my ramblings or putting my ramblings into better words. So that's good. Thank you. So, and then I was coming to BMO's, and this is also C. Mandy's question, which is they would like to know the intention. So, like I said, maybe this wasn't sort of properly expressed in the KIP, or maybe not in the lead up to it. But the idea is this is kind of my understanding of it, by the way, because I didn't. It's not my kip or anything, and so on. So take this with a grain of salt. But my understanding of what the kip sort of represents is a kind of opportunity for DAO members to govern a pool of assets and a large pool of assets, mind you. It is like if this was like a funding a startup, it would be an extremely well-funded startup. So to govern a pool of assets with a degree of liberty that they don't currently have, and because that seems to be what people are really frustrated about, is that, you know, we can't. There's a number of things that you just can't do with these assets because somebody would be on the hook for it, and it would cause all kinds of trouble to people. But if a pool of assets was to be separated, that doesn't quite have the sort of historic baggage of where it came from and how, and this sort of thing, then there's much more liberty as to what you can do with those assets. So you could, for example, build another project that kind of, I mean, you could even build a competitor for all you like, for all I or, you know, for if you so wish. Or you could build something that kind of feeds into the Rook project. Or you could, or do whatever. I mean, the assets would be just purely up for governance. And there's tremendous opportunity in that, in terms of if that kind of incubator DAO chooses to be a part of Rook, the system in some way, then it can. And it's just up for people whether they want that or whether they kind of come up with a cracker of an idea and put it into practice. I know this sounds kind of woolly, but the reason I'm not giving very specific examples is because I don't know if that kip's going to pass. And I mean, whether or not it does, or whether some other different version of the same source of idea does, I wouldn't want to be the guy who kind of set the tone of it, because that's not up to me, and it's not up to the team or anybody else. The whole point of the proposal is that there's liberty to do what you want with the assets, and it's just down to governance. You can even elect your own team. But whatever. But there's definitely ways that, or I've seen versions of the same intention, which is to leave the project itself with enough runway and ability to do its thing, whilst also giving more freedom to the token holders in how they govern these assets that were built differently and had different kind of central ideas behind them. I think the intention behind both the current KIP and those ideas is broadly the same. I think the intention is that we want to keep both of these things, or that we want to keep the project and we want it to have enough runway and we want it to flourish. I mean, I know there are people who don't necessarily want that, but I think most of the people who came up with sorts of constructive proposals, I think it seems like that's the intention there too. But the problem that we have is that the project as it currently is, or the DAO as it currently is, or whatever, doesn't give enough for the token holders. I think that's a sense that I think is very broadly shared in the community. And so what do we do to create more or create more opportunities for the token holders so that they could do the kind of things that they want? And I think that's the central intention behind it. Maybe that's not very clear and a little bit rambling, but that's the idea. Maybe, there's ideas and there's execution. If you think that this wasn't the right execution, then I assume that this KIP won't pass, and that's fine. There's other ways that we could try to strike that balance too. And importantly, I and literally everybody else would be extremely interested in hearing how that balance can be struck in a better way. So yeah, feel free to DM or write KIPs or do your thing. Now a couple more questions, and then I think I'll have to maybe eat something today. So the incubator DAO itself wouldn't have any intrinsic stake in the Rook protocol remaining treasury anymore, correct? Depends what you mean by stake. So, I mean, I hope that what was hopefully clear from how I started this call is that there isn't really that stake anyway. If what you mean by stake is kind of a residual claim in the assets, then there could well be some kind of mechanism that allows for that incubator DAO to have a say in other things, like, I mean, or even I can envisage a proposal where that incubator DAO has a say in the treasury of what's now currently the DAO treasury, right? Like, that's perfectly possible. Like, you could build all kinds of mechanisms for that. Like, for example, one, like, it's just a random idea, but you could appoint somebody from that DAO to come and oversee, like, I don't know, like, be a member of the multisig or something. You know, that these are perfectly possible things. There's nothing inherently wrong about them or anything like that. The main way that influence over the current treasury was or would kind of exist. The main way that what happens with the assets can be influenced if this KIP passes is a basically persuasion, so that what the incubator DAO is building or whatever they're doing is kind of so good that or so valuable or useful for the Rook project or whatever else that Rook wants a stake in it, which may not be satisfactory to everybody, but you know, that is how quite a lot of very good business partnerships are created. And there's certainly a lot of kind of as it were, there's a lot of love for the token holders in inverted commas. So the incubator DAO, if it passes, and it may not, you know, but as an idea, it is one that would one that the kind of the team would have a lot of kind of, I don't want to say sympathy for, but you know what I mean. This kind of, there would be a lot of good feeling in that. But anyway, what I'm saying is that there are kind of hard mechanistic ways to retain some kind of influence, and these are perfectly possible for us to vote on. Like, there's nothing stopping us from writing. I don't mean us as in the team. I mean us as all of us token holders. There's nothing stopping us from, you know, putting that in a KIP. Like, you could put a KIP out right now that says amend KIP so and so to include this mechanism. You know, that's a perfectly possible thing. So there's mechanistic ways that you could do that. And then there's also this kind of what we in the business would call soft law things. So, but that's kind of, I don't want to direct too much about what I think those ways could be in particular, because it's not the point of the DAO. But it is what it is. The incubator DAO KIP may not pass, and if people are really object to it, then that of course is their right. We're not going to jam that down your throats. It's your right to vote against it if you don't like it, or to want to pass an amendment to it. That's also completely fine. Seaman says team holds majority votes. Yeah, but majority doesn't really win. Oh, and it's apparently even not true. So there you go. Which actually, yeah, makes sense, because the team doesn't. So there's a lot of tokens in a wallet, but those aren't voting tokens, or those tokens have never voted, and I think it's extremely doubtful as to whether you could vote with them, because they're not actually held by a single individual. They're held in a multi-sig, and one of the, well, anyway, I don't know if I want to get into legal weeds on this, but the point is, you don't have to you wouldn't have to worry about those tokens voting as long as they're in that wallet. And as Wes points out, it's the governance system that we have doesn't actually operate like that either. So it's not majority wins. It's not a 51% governance system. By the way, I think maybe one thing that I think maybe the community has not taken full advantage of is that it's possible as I'm sure you all know, it's possible and preferable for community members to become sophons who do the review work. I mean, it's in some respects a thankless task because it's not nice always to have to review other people's KIPs, but you could do that, and that position is important, and it's really difficult for us to find people to do that. Like, thankfully, we did manage to get a community member recently into it, but there's a lot of kind of cajoling of people to do that job, and I get it because it's a thankless task. But if you want kind of governance superpowers, then that's an option. You could put yourself up for a sophon position, so people who are sorely needed in the governance system. Occam just asked again the same question that Bimo asked, and I guess maybe my answer was I'll take the criticism where it is, which is it was a rambling expression, but let me try to simplify that if I can. So what I think everybody wants, or what I think everybody who has some semblance of belief in the project wants, is two things. One is that the project stays alive, and therefore that the project has some kind of runway. And two, a slightly competing goal, which is that the token holders get a kind of larger liberty when it comes to what they can do with assets. And the intention was to try to have those two things at once. The problem with that intention is that these two things are in conflict to an extent. And the surface at which they have conflict is often a kind of a legal one because of the aforementioned risks. So the intention is then refined to, we want these two things which are in slight conflict, and thirdly, we want these two things in a way that doesn't get everybody into legal trouble. That was the intention, if that was clearer. Okay, questions on how to become a sophon, which is good news. But yeah. Oh, Rizzo asked a good question which I missed. So how does the regulatory/legal burden, or does the regulatory/legal burden not just get passed to the incubator DAO? Is it the fact that revenue generation cannot be related to a token in any way? Thus, this incubator cannot generate revenue, but it could legally engage with the OG protocol team on a contractor basis. So a number of questions there. The last one is the easiest to answer, so I'll start with that. Yes, it could very easily engage with the, as it were, OG protocol team on a contractor basis. It would also have a lot of, as it were, negotiating oomph when it comes to what kind of contractor it would be. It would be like a super contractor because it has this, this very large pool of assets, which is completely atypical of any other contractor. Like, I didn't come into this with saying, hey guys, I have 10 million, I could do this, this, and this with it. What do you say if we start doing something together? And by the way, as a condition of my entering into this contract with you guys, I would like a board seat, or I would like a seat in Verticom's board seat. So I would like a influence in how you run your protocol. So perfectly possible. And if this proposal were to pass, then I would certainly be rooting for something like that. Incubator cannot generate revenue is not quite right. So it could. The way that the revenue, if you, I mean, obviously it could generate revenue. What it would have some difficulty doing is distributing that revenue to token holders, depending on how it's structured. Not necessarily, and because it starts with basically a flat structure if it passes. So and in that situation, it's much easier to divide whatever assets you have if that's what you want. But also later, I mean, there are ways that could be done. So revenue generation is not the problem; it's the division of profits that tends to create issues. But they are the incubator DAO would be free of all kinds of legacy legal problems that the current DAO has. So, for example, that incubator DAO did not launch that token, and it's very clear if you just kind of look at it that the token is just a thing that kind of randomly, as it were, got attached to this pool of assets. So it's not like that pool of assets was somehow generated with the token or the token sale or anything like that. So there's all kinds of legal wiggle room that the new incubator DAO has that we don't have. I mean, I don't want to go into too much detail there, but point is that the new DAO could do things that we can't. I think that actually answered all those three questions, oddly enough. I was just trying to answer the last one. But yeah, so how does the regulatory legal burden not just get passed to the incubator DAO? Well, it's basically whatever issues we might have. And remember that this isn't even the only these kinds of profit generation or profit sharing things. They're not the only regulatory problems that a system like ours faces or will face in the future. Bear in mind that this whole protocol is in MEV, and that has a bag of legal problems of its own, which are completely untested and nobody knows what they are. Or, I mean, nobody knows the kind of full extent of them. So, there's all kinds of things that incubator DAO wouldn't have to worry about that we do. If the incubator DAO wishes to engage my services, then I'd be more than happy to advise on some of those stuff. But this is a joke, by the way. I'm not trying to grift my way into a new DAO. Okay, well, I have noticed that I've already gone through, burned through the time that we have, and half an hour longer. But I don't see a lot of other questions. I think it's mostly to do with how does one become a Sophon, and the material is there, and this sort of thing. He has connections to team. Nathan does. Oh, are you saying Nathan the latest Sophon is a member of the team, or an unofficial member of the team, or something like that? That's not the case. So I don't know him, and I've never spoken with him, and I don't know what he does with his time. But I feel like if he was a member of the team, I would have probably had to have some reason to speak with him by now. But yeah, right. So sorry for taking so long. I hope that was helpful, and thank you all for the good questions, and thank you all for the very civil discussion. I'm very happy to see that. And bear in mind again that we are more than happy to hear kind of constructive suggestions on how we might achieve some of the slightly competing goals that various kind of classes of people involved in Rook have. Not saying that it's necessarily going to be easy, but it is something that I think everybody wants to solve, and that includes the team. So thank you all very much, and I will speak to you again soon, either in chat or maybe we'll do another one of these calls if we have another sort of cause for it. Or maybe just generally, I might just come and chat about my dog or something. So thanks very much, and have a good evening.
Thanks, everyone. And we'll have our governance workshop tomorrow, 3 p.m. Eastern, where we look forward to seeing you there and working through reconciliation here. But for now, see ya.